Welcome to the Exceptional Sales Leader Podcast with Darren Mitchell. If you're a sales leader looking to take your leadership to a whole new level, then this is the podcast for you. We'll be exploring tips, techniques, and strategies to help you take your leadership to the exceptional level and allow you to enjoy more money, more meaning, and better sales results. Welcome back to the Exceptional Sales Leader Podcast. Darren Mitchell here from a very cold Macedon Ranges here in Victoria, and have the absolute pleasure of speaking with Mr. Amer Tadayon, all the way from a very, very warm Las Vegas, Nevada. How are you?
Exact opposite.
Man, because just before we press recording, you're telling me that for those of you who work in degrees Celsius, it's about 45 degrees Celsius in Vegas, which I think you said was about 113 Fahrenheit.
That's right. That's right.
Man, that is hot. That is hot, but not as bad as perhaps if you're in New York at the moment, because it's a little bit more humid over there, apparently.
Yeah, the humidity is kind of non-existent here right now, so that's good.
Man, it's hey, the benefits of technology is fantastic, because you and I can be talking on the other side of the world, but you don't really have an appreciation of maybe the climate in each part of the world.
Right.
Unless, of course, you were doing this outside, in which case you're probably under a big umbrella, sitting on a pina colada or something.
No, and I'd probably still be dripping in sweat and you'd be wondering what's going on. So
awesome. So, Amer, great to have you on the podcast. You are the CEO and founder of LuciHub.
LuciHub, yep.
And you've got a big background in sales and sales leadership in the startup space, but also what is also intriguing is you're a professional musician as well.
Yeah.
And this will be an interesting conversation because we don't know sort of which angles it's going to go, but for the listeners' benefit, this is a conversation that will be around resilience, picking up talent, talking about cultures, and helping people to build hopefully high performing teams that leads to sustainable success. So looking forward to this conversation immensely. Amer, if we could start with just a little bit of a background on you in terms of, what you've done in your career, what led you to be a professional musician, and specifically what's led you to do what you do today as a CEO and founder of LuciHub.
It's pretty varied, actually, Aaron. So I grew up wanting to be a professional musician, and then the movie Top Gun came out, and I thought, well, boy, being a fighter pilot would be cool. And so I totally pivoted, and somehow I ended up studying computer science and human factors and never became a pilot at all. And the music kind of went on hold. Actually, in fact, I didn't pick up the music until I think 8 years ago, I picked music back up. But I lived in the Bay Area at the time, in San Francisco Bay Area. And like everybody else, I got in the software industry, and I was putting myself through university. And so I got a job as a salesperson.
Mm-hmm.
First, I was an inside salesperson, right? Did 2 years of that, and then I did outside sales. But I really, really wanted to be a product guy, and I finally got a shot at a product manager job. And when they gave me the offer, it was about 30% of my total income that I was making as a salesperson.
Wow!
And so I didn't take it. I said, I can't do this. So I stayed in sales, and business development. I did a lot of global alliances early on in my career, which was really cool because I got to see the world on IBM's dime and Cognizant's dime. But it was great because I started in direct sales, went to indirect sales and channels, and kind of learned all of it. And then I went and became an entrepreneur, and I realized everything I learned really paid off being an entrepreneur, because you're selling the product, you're selling investors, you're literally selling everybody.
Yeah.
On it. So that's kind of the path I took. And it varied. I went into the film business for a while, started a digital production company. I started an agency, and this most recent company is kind of the culmination of all of it. It's an AI powered video production platform. So it's technology plus people, and it's managed service. So it's kind of the connecting the dots of my entire career.
Yeah. And I'm sure there's lots and lots of lessons you've been able to learn along the way that help you in what you're doing today. If you look back on your sales career, because you mentioned that you had the opportunity to go into a role at 30% of your sales salary, which you think, oh, okay, I'm going to take a 70% pay cut here. I'm not going to do that. is there some key foundational lessons that you've sort of always revert back to that even helps you with today
Yeah,
around
well, I
selling?
think that the biggest lesson I learned as a salesperson was listening.
Mm,
It's a really hard skill. It's a really, really hard skill. But if you listen to people, they typically tell you what they're looking for and what they're interested in. And you've got two types of salespeople. You've got the people who actually sell you what you need, and you've got the people who feature vomit and just tell you how great whatever they're doing is, and they never really listen to you, right? There's the biggest lesson I learned. And the other lesson I learned is sometimes people don't need what you have.
mm.
So, a lot of salespeople will just try to shove a product down your throat. I always took the stance of I'm going to walk away from this, and I can't tell you how many times it's paid dividends because that customer has come back to me at some later time, right?
Yeah, yeah.
I've always played the long game. I've never played the short game, and I don't think most people do that. And for me, it's always been the long game, and it's always paid off eventually.
And when you're talking about that, I mean, thinking about because there'd be a lot of pressure as a salesperson, and you would have been in this position as well. You've got people writing you every single day to say, what are you going to close this week? What are you going to close this month? So it's the pressure of trying to marry up. I've got to get my number this month or this quarter, but also start to invest for the future. How
Mhm.
challenging at the time was it for you to be able to say no because you probably didn't have a right fit for that particular customer? And what were some of the, I guess, conversations you then had to have internally with the organization you're working with to say, hang on, how come you've let this live customer go? Don't you realize we've got to convert everybody?
Yeah, no, it's so it's happened quite a bit actually. And I've been on the flip side where I remember one year I thought I hit all my numbers and my sales manager called. I was on the ski slopes. I was literally on a chairlift and he calls and he says, you need to find another 50,000. And I'll never forget it. I called a really good relationship I had and I
Yep.
said, "Can you buy $50,000 worth of software and I'll train your team next quarter?"
Yep.
And he did, and it was really funny. I mean, they needed the product, and they were gonna pay for it at some other time. But I've had to have those conversations, and I'll tell you what's worse is being the founder of a company and letting a deal walk away, knowing you've got payroll in 2 weeks, right?
Yeah.
And I've
Yeah.
had to do that a lot of times. Sometimes it's just they're just not the right client,
Mm.
um, and I know that if we push a product down their throat, it's going to come back at us in other ways that it's not going to work.
Yeah.
And other times they're just going to be a horrible client. So why save ourselves? So let's save ourselves the headache now and figure it out. I had a really good sales manager early on in my career. He said, "Look, if you put a deal, if you pull a deal out of that pipeline, you better find a way to fill it back up, right?"
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
for me, it's constant prospecting, and I think for any salesperson, it's constant prospecting, right? And I think the other part of it is if you really want to be successful in sales, learn to be creative, right? There's
Mm.
always more than one angle or one approach to getting a deal done. Be creative with it. We do that in this startup every day. I mean, we have clients that have budget issues or they just don't need the product for another 6 months or whatever it is. And so we'll extend the contract an extra 3 months so they have runway. So that we actually did this at the end of the year last year. We needed to hit some numbers because we were closing our first round of outside funding.
Yeah.
The client loved the product. She's like, "I love this. I just don't need it for another 3 months."
Yeah.
Well, it's the end of the year. You've got budget you're going to burn. We won't give you a 12-month subscription. We'll give you an 18-month subscription. You've got an extra 6 months to burn through it. She
Hmm.
signed the deal, right?
Nice.
We just had another one. It was just the end of the quarter, right? Last month was the end of the quarter for us. We needed to get some numbers in, and we got really creative on some pricing, and we got an existing client to quadruple their spend with us.
Yeah.
So I think creativity as a salesperson goes a long way.
Yeah. And you mentioned before building creativity, but also playing the long game. So
Yeah.
as a founder of a startup and certainly as a sales leader running an organization where you do have pressure to perform, you've got the external expectations placed upon you, perhaps from venture capitalists and so forth, but you've also got to pay people in terms of the payroll. Can you just talk through the challenge of guess marrying up those expectations, but also having the courage to make those decisions? And how hard is it to do that when you're in the moment?
We made a really hard decision last quarter. We decided, we had we're a startup, right? We're 2 years old now, or 2 years new, and we had what we thought was our ideal customer profile.
Yeah.
And while they were a great potential customer profile for us, they weren't the best, right? They might have been 3 tiers down
Yeah.
in where we were selling. We invested our first 8 months of sales and marketing budget into that audience, and it wasn't converting as much as we wanted it to. And I made a really hard decision. I said, you know what, guys, let's stop. We have a better audience here.
Yeah.
Let's stop making the investment now. Investors are going to be mad at us because we're going to take a hit on our quarter. But if they see the pipeline we're going to create for next quarter, I think they'll be fine with it, right?
Yeah.
And so I actually had to call one of our lead investors and say, hey, you're not going to see the run rate that you've been seeing for this reason. And I thought he was going to be really upset. And you know what he said to me? He said, that's a really gutsy move that most entrepreneurs would not have made,
Yeah.
right? And I think it's going to pay huge dividends this quarter. We've got some Fortune 50 clients now that we're going to sign because of it,
Yeah.
that were never in the pipeline because of where we were going with our spend, right?
Mm.
So I kind of had to hit the reset button. It hurts financially, right?
Yeah.
And it did hurt last quarter, but I think we're far better for it now. It's also one of the reasons I hated working in a public company because you couldn't make those decisions in a public company. You got slammed for it if you did. We're a private company, we're a startup, and we decided to make a pivot,
Yeah.
uh, and I was upfront with everybody about it. I didn't hide it. I didn't, BS them. I didn't give them false numbers. I said, "Here's what's going to happen. We're going to take a hit,
Mm.
but it's going to pay in the long run," and it is right now.
And it's a risk that you probably need to take for the betterment of the organization, the future of the organization. But as you say, you probably couldn't do that in a public company because of all the bureaucracy and regulations and process and change management stuff that have to go into it.
Well, moreover, the street, you've got the shareholders who are expecting growth, right?
Yeah.
Go tell them you're going to take a 50% dip on the quarter and see how they're going to take it, right? So
Not good.
yeah, I think being in public companies in the sales leadership role is probably the hardest thing I ever did,
Yeah.
and I don't know if I'd ever want to do it again, to be candid. If I was in there, I could do it, but it wouldn't be my first choice.
But even having to make that decision as a leader in a private company, that takes courage, that takes guts, because that could have gone multiple different ways. And like, I guess the thing that I get from that is the people that are in your organization that are seeing you as their leader, making the tough decisions, but for the betterment and the longer term viability of the business, that probably teaches them more in those sort of circumstances than just going with the status quo or pushing through with the existing ideal customer profile and hoping that it's going to turn around.
Yeah, I know, and hope's not a strategy, right? You know, one of our core values is be a leader,
Yeah.
and all the way through. And then one of the things I always tell my team, I tell the entire company, I said, you'll never get fired for speaking up,
Yeah.
but you'll get fired if you don't speak up, right?
Yeah.
And so we needed to know what was happening. Why weren't these deals converting? Why were the deal sizes so low, right? And I remember one of our head of customer success, she goes, I just think we need to find our people. And I said, you
Mm.
know what, Jen, you're right. We haven't found our people. We think
Mm.
these are our people, and they're good people, but they're not the audience that we really need to sell to.
Yeah. And
Um, so
and
what
so
we did was we actually repositioned the engineering team and said, guys, start working on a white label and let's look at going after the agencies there. That's where all the videos are being made,
yeah.
not in internal comms necessarily, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So I was going to ask you, how did you then pivot and what was it? So you talked about agencies and looking for the white label process or the opportunity that way.
Yeah, so what we did was on the engineering side, we completely hit the brakes on a product that we were almost ready to roll out,
Mm.
and said, this white label will open up a very big channel for us. And we actually went the channel model, right? It's, hey, they've got all the clients, they've got the pain points, and we've got a solution. Let's make it available.
Mm.
So they did a great job. I think, we've got a really agile team, and the engineers I think in less than 60 days, were able to get what we needed turned around. And then on the sales and marketing side, my head of marketing basically started redirecting the spend towards agencies. And then we went and found a really good agency sales exec and brought him in. And what I did from an incentive standpoint, as I said, look, um, every month here is like a year for another company. So we we'll make your compensation twice as lucrative for the first quarter you're here. Go. And
Yeah,
boy, did he go, right? I mean, he did an amazing job filling the pipeline in just the first month that he was with us.
yeah.
But that's
That,
that's what we did. We turned the ship around collectively. The product team, the sales team, the marketing team, and even the post team. We started doing things like long form. We started in the short form business.
yeah.
We started doing long form. We started looking at doing things that professional production was doing, where we were doing sizzles and things for comms teams that didn't need it, right? So we literally revamped the company in less than 90 days.
That's amazing. And as you were talking about that, I'm thinking you must have to create a really strong culture where there's levels of empowerment, but also, as you said before, you've got to have a voice, you've got to give feedback, you've got to put your hand up and ask questions and stuff like that. So let's talk about your experience around the importance of bringing in the right people, having the right people in the right roles. It's probably an obvious question to ask, but I'll ask it anyway. As a leader, particularly a leader of a startup, 2 years in, how critical is it to get the right players in the right positions on the team?
I think it's the most important thing you can do. And I'll tell you a really ugly story. There was a company I started. Raising capital is incredibly difficult. I don't care who you are; it's still difficult, right?
Mm,
And there was a group that came in and said, "We'll give you all the money you want, but we want to put in our own CEO." So I stepped down and I became the president and chief product officer. That one individual completely destroyed the company in less than a year, right? I
wow.
mean, completely destroyed it. Biggest lesson of my life. When I started this company, there was an investment group that said, "Hey, we'll give you all the money you want, but we're going to bring our own people in." And all I could think about was that one horrible experience I had, years ago. And I turned down the money, and it was a large amount of money, right? Um, but what came with it just wasn't worth it. And so, it took us longer to get to where we got to, but we have great people. We have people
Mm,
that literally, if you saw them, you'd think that it was their company and they started it, and they've got everything invested in it. And to a sense they do, because, you know, I poached people out of the Microsofts of the world that were
yeah,
making huge compensation, and they're working here for a fraction of that compensation, but for a ton of upside, right?
yeah, yeah,
And so you've got to, first of all, you've got to sell them on the story to make sure that they're on board. But then when they're on board, they're on board. I think people are the difference, without a doubt, in the success or failure of a company. We can probably point to a million companies that were very well capitalized that don't exist anymore, right?
yeah, yeah,
So I think for me, it's people first,
yeah,
and it's culture first.
yeah. So when you think about that, and the question I have then for you is it culture or is it people? Or is it the people that develop the culture? Or do you as the CEO, as the founder, have to create what you think will be the best culture for the future of the business and then find the people that will integrate with that culture? Or does it kind of evolve?
So I think for me, it's finding the right people that will fit in the culture,
Mm,
right? And sometimes you think they're the right people, and you step in and they're just not the right people,
yeah.
and you got to get them out of there really quickly, right? I had a great comment when I brought in my head of marketing, and he'd been with me two other companies. He walked up after we had our team dinner, and he walked up to me and said, "You know what's great about this company? Everybody tonight I met with, I could sit down and have a beer with."
Wow.
You just don't hear that very often, right?
Yeah.
They all really do have each other's backs. They take this be a leader thing really seriously. I don't have to be around for them to make really important decisions and make them work. And look, if it fails, at least they made the decision.
Yeah.
I'd rather they make the decision than not make the decision at all, right?
Yeah. Absolutely.
So
It's a great test, if you like, the beer test. Would I have a beer with them? Would I have a coffee with
yeah,
them?
he
Would I
literally
have would I,
walked down and said, "I could have a beer with everybody on this team."
yeah, well, there you go.
So,
Which is a great testament to what you've created. When you're thinking about then culture, and I'm sure, well, I know different companies have different cultures and what they think is important to them, and and albeit that's fine. When you look at your organizations you've built and the lessons you've had through your career, is there some what you consider to be core elements of culture that are kind of ubiquitous, irrespective of the size of the organization, that are just non-negotiable? And if so, what are they?
Well, for me, there are, and I've left companies because they didn't exist,
Yeah.
right? Or that the leadership didn't believe in them. I think one of them is leading with empathy, right?
Hmm.
Look, you don't know what people are going through every day, and some people have a bad day one day, and some people don't. And I think I think too many people forget that part of it, right? So for me, I think empathy is one of those things, and the other is respect.
Yeah.
Um, I think those two have to exist for you to build an environment where people are going to thrive. I've unfortunately been in companies where they didn't exist, and it did start from the top, right? And you had sales leaders and salespeople literally stealing business from each other, doing all kinds of horrible things to get ahead. And you just kind of take a step back and go, wow,
Yeah.
is this really happening, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And I bet you it's the norm and not the exception. I think, in some of the larger organizations, I think that's the norm, right? I mean, I think if you want to dig in a layer deeper, Darren, you talk about psychology and you talk about personalities and people, right?
Yeah.
And the word narcissism is overused, but in the corporate world and in the executive world, it's actually a pretty dominant trait, right?
Mm,
And
it
so
is.
with that comes some bad. And so you've got to kind of find that the leaders that don't, it's not about power, it's about, success of the team and everything else. And I think those people are harder to find, candidly.
They are. And when, as you were saying that, I was just reflecting on some of the companies that I've worked with, and worked at, and there was a lot of internal competition, which the senior executives thought, well, that's just fantastic because at the end of the day, we're going to have people who are going to be really hungry, and there's really only one winner at the end of it, and that is the company, right? So and they say, oh, we're here to create a great environment for you guys, and empowering to make decisions, and you'll get reward and recognition. But some of the behaviors that you saw was similar to, well, I've got an opportunity. I'm not going to give it to you because even though you might have a better contact and a better relationship, this is my account. So I can't let you in there because I will not get the commission for it. And that sort of stuff just started to permeate. And it was more a case of let's look after me versus let's look after the we.
Well, I worked with a team where it was the sales leader who was one of the owners basically created this rule of house accounts, and he wouldn't give them to the reps because he didn't want to pay the commissions out, right? And you're thinking, well, so you're going to give it to the rep to do some work, but you don't want to pay the commission. It was really interesting, but it was self-serving, right?
Yeah,
I want to keep the profit and the margin, and I don't want to pay the rep. And I know anyone who's listening to this podcast who's in the sales role has been burned at least once or twice in their careers with their commissions, right?
totally.
And at the end of the day, it's like, why? Like,
Yeah.
if they did the job, they should get paid the commissions. But um,
It's actually nuts. And I remember there was one particular deal that we did back in the day, and my sales general manager came to me and said, right, what you need to do is you need to retrospectively change the sales targets for these two reps because they will be paid far too much commission. We simply can't afford it. And I'm thinking, hang on a second. Commission, you guys keep telling us that this is untapped earning potential. And if these guys are good enough to create a deal that's great business for not just the organization, but for the customer, they should get fairly compensated. Talking about narcissism, it actually worked out that the general manager didn't want these two reps potentially ending up making more money than him.
yeah, I've seen that happen several times, by the way. I
Jeez.
mean, I've lived that exact scenario where the sales manager was just killing him that the salespeople under him were going to be making more money than him. And in one case, it actually happened to me where he pulled the deal from me and took it in and went and took credit for the deal. I
Wow.
ended up leaving that company. It was early on in my career, but I took it all the way to we were basically shortlisted 3 accounts, and he found out. And first he got mad that he wasn't in the meetings for those to get us there, but then he went and took the final meeting, won the deal, and took credit for the deal. And I remember resigning the next day. So
And I'm sure there was no attempt for them to try to keep you on the books either.
No, it was a huge account, and it was an incredibly profitable deal, and you know they didn't care. So, but it was a really good lesson for me, really
Mm.
great lesson for me.
And so, how do you then take that sort of lesson? Because I know one of the things that you would have had to have dealt with as you developed in your startup career was this concept of failure or things not going according to plan. And you kind of already alluded to this last quarter in terms of having to make some challenging decisions at LuciHub. What are some key lessons that you've been able to learn from failure? And the reason I ask that is I'm a firm believer that we can't actually learn a lot from success, but you can learn a lot more from making mistakes and from failure. And yet, the
Yeah,
environments that many organizations are operating in, and certainly their people, is don't make mistakes, don't fail because failure is bad. You're in trouble if you fail.
yeah. I've been fortunate in my corporate career. I've had some really good leaders. I remember when I started at IBM, and I was in my late 20s. The lab director who interviewed me said, I want you to try things, and I'd rather have you fail than be afraid to try anything. And I'll never
Yeah.
forget that. It was one of the best lessons I ever got. And boy, did I try a lot of things there, right? And I got my wrist slapped a lot, and I got in trouble, and it kind of became a joke about Amer being the shit starter in the organization a little bit in the group I worked in. But it was one of the best lessons I got when she said, "Hey, I want you to try things, and I want you to fail. I'd rather have you do that than just stand back and not do anything at all." And that's kind of how I lived my life, right?
Mm,
I probably a bit of more of a risk taker than I should be, but I actually think most entrepreneurs are, and I think it's kind of an addiction. I think it's, like, you should probably check us all into rehab. We push too far when it comes to the finances, everything else, right?
yeah.
I learned some really hard lessons. One of them was the right people. Like that was the most important one I learned. Too many startups that I was in, I just had the wrong people in it, and for the wrong reasons, right?
Mm,
Yeah, raising capital is hard, but and the second lesson to that is there's good money and there's bad money. You hear people say that, you never understand it until it destroys your business.
yeah.
And like, okay, yeah, now I know what bad money looks like, right?
Yeah.
And now I know what good money looks like. So those are, I think, two of the biggest lessons I learned. And I think the third one for me was culture. I think
Yeah.
that's a really important one. If if people are happy where they're at and they're just going to spend a lot of their time there, they're not going to be looking for another job. They're not going to be looking. They're going to be thriving and they're going to be succeeding. And so part of that for me is giving people a roadmap to success. It's not, hey, yeah, you've got this job, but God, what if you had this job for the rest of your life? You didn't see any upside, you didn't see any bonuses, you didn't see anything, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I everybody in this company has a ton of potential for upside on an exit, and they have a ton of potential on bonuses once we get to profitability and we get to where we're going,
Yeah.
right? When I sold P2K Labs, the employees all benefited immensely, right?
Yeah.
It was life changing for everybody, not just for me.
Yeah.
And I think that's how it has to be. And I just see too many companies worried about the founders and the leadership and not everybody else. Right before this interview, right before our session, I was on with one of my former employees who's applying for a job, and we just had that conversation. I said, "What are you going to get out of this? You have no upside, you have no bonuses, you have
Mm,
no equity. You're going to a startup that isn't even going to give you stability because they could be out of business in 3 months.
yeah.
What are you going to get out of it, right?"
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think that's important. I think giving your team something to look forward to from a career path is incredibly important. I think giving them something up, some sort of upside is incredibly important. I would never hire anybody in any position for just a salary. I think
Mm,
that's a horrible thing to do, right?
yeah.
You're going to come in every week and you're going to get a check every month, and that's going to be your life, right? We always do incentives, we do bonuses. Even at LuciHub, we're a small startup, but you can submit um, we look for leaders. So you can submit who's been a leader in the quarter, and you submit it to this email address, and me and a couple of the other executives look at the people that are submitted, and we pick one every quarter, and that person gets awarded a huge stock tranche from us,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
It's a reward that we have, and it could be anybody in the company. It doesn't have to be a salesperson. It can, I think last quarter, they don't know it yet, but it's one of the lead engineers, one of the lead AI engineers
Okay.
is going to get that award.
Yeah,
And
nice.
the quarter before it was one of our product managers,
Hmm.
right? So
That's brilliant. And when you're talking about culture in that respect, as a leader, how important, therefore, is it to understand what motivates people? So you are bringing in the right people. Because you mentioned before, trying to get people from, say, a company like IBM, who might be making, a bucket load of cash each year, to then come in and invest into what you're trying to create. Why do people do that? Because on the surface, people might say, "Well, that's nuts. Why would you take a huge pay cut?" There's got to be something else that's driving these people, and our role is as leaders is to try and find out what that is.
yeah, so that's a really great question, by the way. And I don't know how we've done it in this company, but a lot of people have left some great companies to come here. And I think, I actually asked one of them, I said, hey, um, I'm just curious, like, why did you come over?
Mm,
And this one person was it a really great design firm, and he said, I've never had a product come to life because I've worked on many products, I've worked on many prototypes. I've never actually been able to point to something that's been in market and say, hey, that's a product I worked on and it's in market,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
Another one of them said, look, I've always had leaders who, weren't really leaders, they were micromanagers, and you're giving me an opportunity to build an entire department, which I've never had,
mm,
right? So I think they all have different motivations, right?
yeah. And as
So,
our role as a leader is to figure out what that is, not just assume that a salesperson is going to be motivated by money, or a marketing person is going to be motivated by, getting market penetration or market awareness, whatever the case might be. You've got to ask the question.
well, I'll tell you what's really crazy is you've got all these people coming back to the office, right? And all these CEOs and large companies mandating it. I think the biggest reason I'm getting some really great talent is flexibility.
Yeah, yeah,
We have a rule, and we had this rule at the last company I had. You can work from anywhere, right? And you can even work at any time, but there's a certain slotted amount of hours that you have to be available for the team to communicate with you.
yeah.
And I'll give you a really good example. Our engineer, we have teams all over the world, right? We have an engineering team. One of the engineering teams is in India.
Hmm.
They collectively decided that they want to work a night shift so they can work with the guys in California.
Hmm.
I was actually against it. I said, "You're going to burn out. You're going to this." They're like, "No, the collaboration's great. We love the camaraderie." These guys, I mean, they made the decision themselves, and the CTO and I were totally against it, right? They're the ones who came to us and said, "We want to do this,"
Yeah.
because they wanted to work with the other team, and they had so much fun together.
Mm.
So the flexibility has been like the number one thing for us. I had an employee at the last company. She called me and she said, "I'm ruined for life." And I said, "Why?" She goes, "No one just it's 2 in the afternoon. I'm getting a pedicure. I have a laptop on my lap, and I'm getting all my work done. And my last company would have never let me do that."
Wow.
And I said, "Well, I know you just checked in a bunch of work, so I know you're working. I don't really care where you are." I don't think most companies would let people do that, right?
No, that's right.
And we always manage by objective. We say you have a job to do and you're an adult, go do it. And if you're
Yeah.
not going to do it, then there's problems, right? Then you put them on notice, and you give them a smaller rope, and you let them hang themselves. And some people do that, right? Some people take advantage
Mm.
of the situation, and that's happened. It's happened in this company. It's happened at 3 other companies, and we've found a good way to get them out of there quickly.
Well, that points to culture, doesn't it? Because you talk about we're here to deliver results, and there's going to be a certain level of discretionary effort and efforts required in order to deliver that. But to then have the flexibility to say, you know what, if you want to have that pedicure at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and my own example is I had a sales manager many years ago that says, mate, if you want to go and play golf on a Wednesday afternoon, Friday afternoon, go nuts. You don't have to continue to send emails to me, which you're sending to your customers, so you can tell me that you're working because we don't really care. You've got a target, we trust you, you'll hit the target, it's all good. Go and manage your own expectations and manage your profile that way.
You know what it is, Darren? It's conditioned stimuli. There's so many
Yeah,
bad managers who micromanage and want to make sure you're sitting at a seat, and instead of looking at results, I've always just looked at results.
yeah,
Are we getting our product out in time? Are we getting our sales numbers met? Are we hitting our lead numbers, right? As long as we're doing those, we're fine. When those metrics start to fail, then you've got some problems, right?
yeah,
The other
absolutely.
thing is there's some people who just can't have that level of responsibility without being managed.
Mm,
I've had to let people go who were great in a controlled environment, but when you give them that level of autonomy, they just fall apart. They don't know what to do, right? They've never had that kind of freedom. And so it's not for everybody. And that's one of the things I look at when I hire. Can this person, even when I was at the other company and that was a large company, I said, can this person be entrepreneurial inside of this company? Because
Yeah.
that's what I look for, right?
Yeah.
I never wanted somebody who was rigid and this and that. I wanted them to be able to be flexible.
And by that sounds like develop independent thinking so they can make decisions for themselves, and rather than actually having to go to you or your CTO or head of engineering to actually get permission to do things, we want you to show initiative.
Yeah, I don't let them do that anymore. I don't let them come to me. I literally, and and again, it goes back to conditioned stimuli and having managers who demand to give the final say.
Yeah.
It's really interesting you bring up this point because it was a point of contention a year ago with some of my new hires. I said, look, I don't know where you were, but you don't need to come to me for every question and answer. I'd rather you just make the decision. If it's the wrong decision, we'll fix it. And I have this young marketing person who did a post the other day who completely blew the post. Like it was, the content was off, everything was off, but God bless her, she at least made the post and didn't ask for permission, right? And I called the head of marketing. I said, the context of this video is completely off. He goes, oh, really? I said, yeah. So, well, we'll fix it. And we fixed it right away, right? It didn't cause any huge problems. And it's happened a few times, but I tell everybody, like, I'm empowering you to make decisions. Please make the decisions so I don't have to. I've got a million other decisions to make every day.
Yeah.
And I had a couple of hires and they're senior level hires where they kept coming in asking for permission. And I said, you just got to stop, right?
Mm.
But again, it goes back to they've worked for these leaders who insist on making the final decision, insist on having a thumbprint on that document, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And we've all had those bosses where you do maybe it's a great write-up or maybe it's a great sales pitch, but the sales manager has to be in that meeting so he can take credit for being part of it, right? And so I noticed a lot of that with some of our hires where I'm like, boy, I don't know what kind of people you worked for, but you don't need to come with me, come to me for every answer. Just go
No.
do it.
And
And
what it tells me though, Amir, is that when they come to you, it means that the problem is probably bigger. There's a higher quality of conversation you're going to have, and you probably get a much better outcome. But to teach them self-sufficiency is a critical skill set that any leader should be able to create, because you've got enough on your plate to try and to think about, rather than have everybody coming to you with every single small decision that needs to be
well,
made.
especially at a startup, right? I tell the teams all the time, I say, hey guys, this company, I started this company 2 years ago, but it has to function. If I take a vacation for 10 days, this thing's got to keep functioning. So you've got to think about that, right? Just pretend like I'm not here. And almost all of them have done a great job. My engineering team's done an amazing job taking ownership, right?
Mm.
In fact, our release cadence has never been so good. I mean, we're typically on a 2 week release cadence. Now we're on a 1 week release cadence, and like really great stuff's happening, right? The social team, I stepped away. They're making the decisions and they're pushing the content out, and we had more content come out last month than we ever have. So, this notion of empowering them and letting them just make the calls, even if they're wrong,
Mm.
I think it's the right thing to do.
Yeah, and then obviously there's a feedback loop behind that to make sure that if somebody such as your marketing person gets all the context wrong, you're not criticizing or condemning them. You're actually educating them so that the next time you're empowering them to continue to move forward and make a decision, but maybe be a little bit more guided in terms of the direction we want to head.
Well, you know what we did actually, that particular case, we actually came up with a better process on the back end to eliminate that lack of context,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
Because we have a ton of, I mean, we're a video company, right? We have a ton of internal content too.
Yeah.
And so we came up with an approach where, by the way, we've had them release videos that were like not supposed to be released. Um, we have a group of approved videos from clients that we can use, and we have the rest aren't. And somehow one slipped into the other, and didn't cause any problems. We pulled it, but that led us into a better process as well, right? So if something breaks or something doesn't go as planned, we always take a step back and say, how do we prevent this from happening again,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And that's, I think, the difference of, God, I've had managers who, if you've screwed up, they've just kind of chewed you out for it, but no, there's been no outcome, no nothing better. We always
Yeah,
strive to be better here, right? A better
absolutely.
performance, a better workflow, better process, whatever it's going to be. So every time we make a mistake, we're like, how can we learn from this and how can we make sure it doesn't happen again?
Yeah. So it becomes a platform to make progress, not a platform to criticize and keep people
Yeah.
down and keep people wondering, shit, should I make this decision or not? Because what happens if it goes wrong?
Yeah.
Make a decision.
I was reading a book called The Checklist Manifesto. It's a great book if you're trying to build process and do a bunch of stuff. And this was early on in the start of this company. We were having some challenges on the post side, and I took this book. I'm like, this book we are going to apply to this piece, and we did. And I can't tell you the quality of the productions. Um, they went up by orders of magnitude, right?
Wow.
Just a simple implementation of process and tools. So, yeah, we're going to fail. We're all going to fail. The challenge is you learn from it and make it better.
Absolutely. Progress over perfection, right?
Yes, yes,
Now,
yes.
one of the other interesting things about you, my friend, is you're a professional musician. So it would be remiss of me not to sort of delve into this, because I'm sure there's going to be some fantastic lessons being a professional musician, having to deal with different stakeholders, different egos, and so forth, and
Yeah.
parallels in terms of what you do on a daily basis. If you look back, and I firmly believe that we're all almost like an accumulation of all of our experiences and all the people we surround ourselves with that creates who we are today. What are some key lessons you've taken from being in the professional musician space that has helped you become either a better leader or a better entrepreneur in the business that you run?
So I think one of them, and it's really funny, by the way, if you go to LinkedIn, my LinkedIn is all business. If
Yeah.
you go to my Instagram, which is at.drums, it's all about my music. And so I have friends I grew up with who still to this day think I'm just a professional musician and I don't do
Ah,
anything else but play the drums, which I mean that would be great, but I've got other stuff I do. I think one of the biggest takeaways I got early on, I got really lucky. I got back into music in my late 40s, and I and Vegas is a great place to meet other musicians. I met this singer who was on The Voice, who was touring the Southwest, and so I became the drummer for her band. And
yeah,
so it was, at that time I was at our company had just been acquired, and I was the CRO of this large energy business. But on weekends, I was either driving out or flying out and playing these gigs, and it was like my first real foray into touring and playing with the caliber of people I was playing with. I mean, our
yeah,
guitar player played with some of the largest musicians on the planet, and so I was watching the first of all, the sound check was really educational for me, like what everybody did and how everybody did it. But what I realized is they all have a different lens they see the band through, right? And
yeah,
they all have their different personalities and all that. But what was even more interesting is we all wear these in-ear monitors, and so we all have our own mix. And the mix was as unique as the person. So like I like a full mix. I like hearing everybody.
yeah.
But then at one point I had the bass player's mix and it was just his bass. There was like nobody else he was listening to, right? I had the singer and it was just her vocals and a little bit of, and it was really interesting to see like the perspective each person had of how important each instrument was and how valuable it was to them performing.
Yeah.
If you heard the monitors and all of the different musicians on stage and you heard the mix that you hear on in the crowd, you would be blown away. You would be like, I don't want to hear this band this way. And then there's times I have to play with a click track, right? And so I've got this click, click, click in my ear the whole time. Imagine listening to an entire show with a click track. It's not fun for me, but we've got to do it sometimes. So if I want to draw a parallel, it's like everybody's unique. Everybody has their own lens and their own perspective of what's around them, right?
Mm,
And so I came back and I looked at my business and I said, well, you know, Jennifer, who runs client success, looks at this business a lot differently than our lead engineer or our CTO or our head of marketing. And it was kind of an interesting parallel I drew musically. It's like I hear the whole symphony, and this person may just hear the bass, and this person may just hear some vocals and guitar. So that was one thing I took away from it. The other was you don't realize um, how much personality goes into a band. I mean, you know, and it's amplified because you've got these artists, and I'm not saying all artists, but there's a lot of, artists have their own personalities, and put five of them on a stage together, right? And
Yeah,
some of them want to be in front, some of them want to,
yeah,
it was interesting. And and I have my own band. I'm in a couple of bands, but I have my own band, and I've had a really hard time keeping singers. They'll come in, we'll do the photo shoot, we'll spend a ton of money on promotional content, and then they'll decide they want their name to be in lights and not the band's name in lights, right? So they'll leave, and I got to do it all over again. I got to do it all over again. There's been a lot of interesting lessons, actually. I think the biggest one, and I wish more musicians would think of themselves this way. I don't look at myself as a musician. I look at myself as an entrepreneur. And even my band, right? We sell T-shirts, we do corporate gigs, we do a lot of things to monetize the business.
yeah,
But I treat it as a business. And too many musicians look at themselves as rock stars and not as entrepreneurs. And I think if
yeah,
they took the lens of entrepreneurship, they might understand that, hey, they could set up their LLC and they could write off a bunch of stuff, and that guitar that they really want is in reach because it's a write-off and things like that, right? And I
yeah.
think it's too bad that they don't teach the business of music more than just uh, music.
The art of music. I'm an artist. I'm a creator. I don't have to worry about business stuff. That just takes care of itself.
Yeah, no, exactly, exactly. And then on the flip side, there's some amazing artists here who understand business.
Yeah,
Man, there's a group here called the Femmes of Rock. They're a female string section that does rock and roll, and she tours all over the world, just phenomenally well. And so you see those people, like, okay, well, she gets it, right? She's
yeah,
figured it
yeah.
out.
No, that's brilliant. As you're talking there, I'm thinking there are so many parallels to sales
Yeah.
teams, to executive teams. You've got people who have different motivations, and you mentioned different perspectives because I'll see things differently. And as a leader, and I guess as a founder of a business, you've really got to be able to empathize. And it comes back to the culture we were talking about earlier. Understand what makes people tick and what they see, and how you can get all those individuals to be aligned to a common outcome and have them focused in on how they can contribute to that outcome.
Well, I think that brings this whole conversation full circle to selling, right?
Yeah,
I really believe everybody should take some sales classes. Everybody should actually sell at some point in their career, because we're constantly selling and we're constantly negotiating.
yeah,
We're having a conversation about the business of sales, but when somebody goes home at night, they're negotiating with their partner. Somebody's trying to get something that's not on the menu at a restaurant, they're negotiating a deal. They're selling, right?
mm,
And I think for me, um, making this business or any business successful is selling a vision. It's selling, and the way I do it is I craft a story, right? I
yeah,
Here's where we are today, and here's where we need to be, and here's everything that can happen if we get there,
yeah,
right? So I think it's all about telling the story. And ironically, this company that I started, we tell, our thing is, hey, we enable you to tell your story, and everybody has a story, right? So I think a good
brilliant.
salesperson should probably also be a good storyteller.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, mate, as we bring this into a for a landing, and we'll do a final drum solo as we finish.
Sure.
Should have got you to bring your drum kit and your
Yeah,
drumsticks.
we should have done this in my studio, and I actually have a podcast I'm launching this month called Makers and Jam. I interview people from behind a drum set,
Okay.
and I interview business people who are into music, whether they like music or they're musicians.
Yeah.
And so we have the first four interviews recorded, and one of them is actually the head of HR for a financial services company.
Wow.
And we talk about culture, and we talk about all of that, and then we kind of challenge her on her 90s music skills, and we do a little contest and stuff. But
Sensational.
I take the interview from behind a drum kit.
That is
So
awesome. And you probably can't help yourself. You probably do a bit of tapping as well.
we do, and we do the rim shots on a joke, and then we actually go in and we play a few songs with the guests. So yeah.
Sensational. Sensational. So, Arma, this has been an absolute privilege to have you on the podcast. For people listening to this, what's from your experience and what you've learned over the journey, both as an entrepreneur working in some big organizations, but also as a musician, if there was one piece of advice you'd leave somebody who is either an aspiring leader in sales or an aspiring entrepreneur that wants to, take their performance to the next level, and it might be hard to say just one, is there one thing that that would stand out for you to say, if you focused on this, it will help you fast track progress? It may not guarantee success, but it'll certainly help fast track progress.
So I may be off here, but here's what I think. I think far too many people are afraid to take risks.
Hmm.
I think they'd rather follow the status quo and have that safety net than actually take the risk and potentially fail,
Yeah,
right? And you just never know what's beyond that road, or on that road that's least traveled. So I think if I had to leave people with one piece of advice is take the risk, don't be afraid, right?
yeah,
Take that next step, and don't take the comfortable road that everybody else is on, because you know the results there, right? What you know, as much as you think you could fail, what if you didn't? What if you hugely succeeded, right?
yeah, yeah. It's a
So
great piece of advice. And I think if more people actually literally got out of their own way and stopped overthinking stuff and just went forward with a level of certainty, um, and understanding that whatever happens, they'll be able to handle the consequences, or they'll have people who can help them understand and deal with the consequences, would be a much better society and probably much better businesses.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
awesome.
I think more successful. I think more successful in the sense that I think if most people were willing to take the risks that they're afraid to take, their lives would be more fulfilled.
Yeah, definitely. 100%. So, mate, absolutely fantastic to have you on the podcast. For people who want to know a little bit more about you, you've already given us your Instagram handle.
Yeah,
Is it a.t.drums or at
it's
drums?
at.drums. Yeah,
At.drums.
yeah, yeah.
And we're going to put that in the show notes. Absolutely. Where else can people connect with you and learn more about LuciHub?
So they can go to lucyhub.com, and there's a ton of content and information there. And then we have a Lucy Hub account on LinkedIn, and then my LinkedIn, I believe, is Amer Tadayon, AmerTadayon.
Brilliant. I'll put that in the show notes. And has the podcast? You said you've done 4 episodes in the can. Has
Yeah.
it been launched? Is it in the podcasting sphere yet?
It will be in about 2 weeks. We have an Instagram page up with two little sizzles. That's Makers and Jam. So it's Makers and then the letter N and then Jam.
Okay,
And the idea is that, we bring people who are making things happen, and then we jam with them. So
nice. I'll put that in there as well. So it
yeah,
sounds
that'd be great.
fantastic.
That'd be great.
Mate, best of luck on the continued success of Lucy Hub.
Thank you.
Also on
Darren,
your
it's been a
professional,
pleasure. I really enjoyed the conversation with you. It's been fun.
been brilliant. And even though I think you're just on your left hand shoulder there, is that a Dyson air conditioner?
Yeah, it is. It is. It's an air purifier, actually. It's an air purifier fan.
And it's probably going at full speed right now because right now I've got my heater on.
No, it's not. But it's funny. I just noticed the sun setting, and it's coming right through my window. I don't know if you can see it.
I can, I
It's
can.
coming right through my window.
That
So
is
I'm
brilliant,
leaning over
brilliant,
here a little bit.
mate. All the best to you. And this has been a fantastic conversation. Greatly appreciate you being on the podcast.
Yeah, I appreciate your time and inviting me. I had a lot of fun. We should do it again. You should come out here and come on my podcast.
Love it, love it.
Let's do
All
it.
the best. Cheers, mate.
All right. Take care.
Thank you for listening to the Exceptional Sales Leader Podcast. I trust the information in this episode has been helpful in your journey towards becoming exceptional. And remember, please take the time to rate the show, subscribe to the show so other people can find it. But also, if I can help you, jump on my calendar, go to leadwithdarren.com, and let's have a conversation about how I can help you along your journey to being exceptional.